This video is brought to you by Navac, empowering you to work smarter with their new break-free power tube expander, the NTE 11L. So let's talk a little bit about heat pumps. Down here in the South, there's a lot of heat pumps. We see them all the time, but it can be a mystery in other parts of the nation, and they behave almost 100% like air conditioners. In fact, they basically are air conditioners. I think originally, they were called reverse cycle air conditioners, where instead of pumping that liquid inside to an evaporator coil and cooling a house as the refrigerant evaporated with the air moving across it, the opposite happens. You're subcooling that hot gas coming off the compressor, turning it into a warm liquid, subcooled liquid, and sending it back outside to the evaporator. So the exact opposite is happening. But the same cycle, it's just happening on opposite sides of a design system. So instead of having an evaporator coil inside, let's give an example. Let's say you're one of those lucky northern people that have a basement and you have an evaporator coil. Let's say you have a fan coil, air handler. In the summertime, you have an evaporator coil. In the wintertime, that's a condenser coil. Exact opposite outside. In the summertime, it's a condenser coil. In the wintertime, it's an evaporator coil. Easy to remember, almost exactly the same. The efficiency will vary because to me, it seems like it's pretty much designed for the highest efficiency in cooling. We have our SEER rating. We have our HSPF rating. SEER ratings are typically in the teens, sometimes in the 20s. HSPF ratings are much lower. And when you talk about SEER and HSPF, we're not talking about SEER 2. We're talking about SEER 1. We're talking about how many BTUs per watt are used. So if it's a 13 SEER unit, you're getting 13 BTUs per watt. So if a system's 1,000 watts, then that would be 13,000 BTUs. So you can see roughly where you fall as far as energy consumption. In heating, it's lower because I think it's maximized for cooling. And if you have a heat pump designed for X conditions, it's not going to run as well in other conditions. Because think about this. Think about it if the heat pump was in air conditioning mode, but you had the conditions you see in wintertime. So where the evaporator's at, it's 30 or 40 degrees outside. That puts it into a refrigeration category, almost. If frost's up, has to be defrosted. Just like a refrigeration system has to have a provision for defrost. On the inside, you have a nice temperate day, upper 60s to around 70, typically. There are some people out there who go to 80 degrees or down to 65. That's me. I like it cold inside. So you can see it's not the same conditions. So you can't design for maximum efficiency at every condition. It's just impossible. So it's maximized for cooling, so you don't get as much efficiency in heating. That's why a lot of people will choose gas over a heat pump, just because they're not as efficient as it gets colder and colder. Now, nowadays, heat pumps have come a long way where heat pumps will perform much better than they used to in very, very cold conditions. But you can dive into a heat pump manual and see how badly they do in cold conditions. In fact, let's take a quick look at a manual and I'll show you what I mean. We are on the Goodman website looking at split heat pump GSZ14. I want to pick a really basic one because the more basic it is and the older it is, the worse it tends to do in very cold conditions. So let's bring up the documentation and take a closer look. Before we do that, you can see up to 15 SEER or 9 HSPF. So you can see the big difference. And you can see that the Goodman customer reviews are overwhelmingly positive, lending itself to the notion that these reviews aren't true. Let's take a look at page 34 of this GSZ14 PDF. This is the specifications. So we can see outdoor ambient temperature is on this chart and goes from 65 degrees down to -5 because this is heating. This is the expanded heating data. And this is a matchup of the GSZ 14030, which is 2.5 tons, with the ARUF 29B14 plus TXV. MBH, we see that term. MBH is thousands of BTUs per hour. So you see at 65 degrees, it's putting out 37.15, 37,000 BTUs. Really, really high. Okay, So we go down to 47 degrees, which is a typical heating temperature. At 65, many times the heat pump's not running in heating mode because it's warm enough outside where natural heat producing in the house will counteract any cooling effects. So if you want to set it at 70 inside, it's not going to sink to 65 because you have people inside, you have appliances, and there's enough heat coming off that, like your computer. If you're watching a steamy television show like Dynasty, it's really good, guys, really good. Basically, you create enough heat to offset that. So, of course, there's solar heat as well. We can go into a whole lot of stuff. Solar storage, it's a radiant heat. There's a lot of stuff to cover in HVAC. We're not going to do it all today, guys. MBH. So let's stick back to MBH. Thousands of BTUs. So at 47 degrees for 28.4. So 28,400. That sounds about right. We have a 2.5 ton unit. So at 47, we're definitely going to be running in heating mode. We're looking good. All right, let's drop that down to 30 degrees outside. That drops down to 19.62 or 19,620 BTUs. Okay, that's a significant drop. So when you go down to, let's say, 15 degrees, in fact, let's go all the way down to 0, 9.29, 9,290 BTUs. Very sharp drop in system efficiency. Even though the amperage, you see the amperage starts out 11.9 at 65 degrees outside, but it's only 5 at 0. Well, that's half the amperage, but you're getting what, 25% of the capacity? So the efficiency is way, way off. And you can see that from the COP numbers. It goes from 4.39 at 65 degrees all the way down to 1.57, which I'll sum it up is bad. Do we have heat pumps out there that are older heat pumps that actually we use in these conditions? Absolutely we do. The thing is, we have backup heat. We have heat strips, and they are super efficient, as everyone knows. Resistance heat is not efficient. Not efficient at all. It costs a lot of money to run, but it's very simple. That's always been the appeal of resistance heat. It's very affordable on the front end and expensive in the back end. No pun intended. But you have to have it on heat pumps to compensate for this drop in efficiency and drop in capacity. Newer heat pumps don't have as much difficulty in these conditions because they are variable speed. They can actually ramp up to a higher RPM in these colder conditions to produce more heat, which is a good thing. So the newer heat pumps have that going for them. They will go into applications that the older ones were really not that good for. And keeping in mind, we're talking about a heat pump that's designed for a certain condition. And you can design for colder conditions, but if you're a manufacturer, you're going to design for a broad condition. You're not going to design for very specific unless you have a particular market that's going to be purchasing very specific heat pumps from you. I'm sure there are those out there. Those of you who are in the commercial or industrial field know there are specific units for particular applications. I don't know if any of those are heat pumps. You can fill me in on that. I'm just from the wide, wide world of residential where everything's very basic and no special skills are needed. I wanted to cover a little bit about heat pumps, though, because in the wintertime, it's always tricky. I know we just kind of dove into a little bit of how the efficiencies work, but we're going to have to revisit this too. Let's create another segment coming up, and we'll talk more about heat pumps. I just want to touch on it, get our juices flowing. It's December now, so even the heat pump country it's getting colder out there, guys. It's 40 degrees during the day here. One time, 65 today. So no heat pump required today, but tonight it'll be back down in the 40s. So it's good to have an understanding of heat pumps, especially as they trek north, as their efficiencies get better and their capacities get better in cold temperatures.